Okay. So that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Our session goals for today. We're going to talk about breaking instructional inequity. I'm going to spend a good amount of time talking, and then towards the back end of our time together, we'll break up into groups, and you all are going to do some workshop kind of things and have the opportunity to talk and break bread and share some problem solving goals amongst yourselves. We're going to talk about incorporating the experiences of our students and our children into the learning. And our third goal for today is to identify steps to ensure equity through differentiation. Okay, so 3 main goals for our session today. In terms of housekeeping, I would just say, because we are a small and intimate group, even though we are virtual, this is a small group. If you have a question, by all means, stop me and ask. Participate and engage in the content. Just thinking in terms of us being educators, how we would want our students to engage and approach the work that's ahead of us. Embrace a growth mindset. As one of my favorite rappers used to say, got to get your mind right. So I do recognize I have the dubious distinction of being the barrier between you and a 3-day weekend. But at the same time, we want to use this time to the benefit of our students. Okay. If possible, leave your camera on. If you have to turn your camera off, then you have to turn your camera off. But as much as possible, if you could leave your camera on. And then I want to reiterate, my job, my goal is to make this a safe space to learn and grow. I'm going to talk about some vulnerabilities that I had as a human being and also as an educator, with the hopes that others may feel comfortable sharing as well. However, if you are uncomfortable or unwilling to share in some of these kind of vulnerable conversations that we may have, that is okay as well. Okay. Oh, and mute yourself when you are not speaking. So it looks like a lot of us are in the building, but if you are at home and you have pets or your favorite music is playing in the background, we ask you to just be conscious of your background. Okay, so we can't get started without an icebreaker. Here's what our activity is going to be. Just given where we are with our as a planet and as a species dealing with COVID-19 and where we've been the last 10 or 11 months, depending on how you look at it, we tend to think of COVID-19 and the coronavirus in terms of what we have lost. But I want to go around the room and just ask everyone to share something that they believe they've gained since the pandemic. And here's the key, because I would love to hear your stories, but we're going to say what we have gained in one sentence. Okay. So, disclaimer, I am going to forget to call on someone, but I'm going to look at my screen and go right across. And when you all see me, the next time you see me, you can thump me in the head, because I guarantee you, I'm probably going to skip someone. But why don't we start with Miss Astrid? Am I pronouncing that right?
Yeah.
Unmute yourself. Give one thing that you have gained over the last 11 months.
10 pounds.
Headphones?
10 pounds.
Oh, salud. Okay, Mr. Brendan.
This job.
Mr. Smith?
A notary license.
Okay, I'm holler at you. Ms. Lewis?
I've gained perspective and a children's book.
Ms. Caitlin?
I gained my med tech certification to help out all my students here at school.
Okay. And Caitlin, how do you pronounce your last name?
Morace.
Maurice.
So it's more ace. That's how I always say it.
Maurice.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. Miss Sarah?
A new place to live.
Awesome. Miss Shirley?
Yeah, I gained a new perspective on how we use our time.
Okay. Mr. McHale? Should I call you Father McHale?
It's Mr. McHale. Just not a priest yet. It's a couple years away. What did I give? An appreciation for grading, or a disdain for it, depending on the day.
Miss Lucas?
I gained more time with my family. I appreciate that.
I hear people nodding their head, but I couldn't hear, but okay.
I gained more time with my family. More time with my family. Okay.
Miss Jamita, am I pronouncing that right? I went to elementary school with the Jamita. Her name was Jamita Lott.
Okay. I've never heard my name besides my name.
She was Jamitta.
Okay, and that's how you pronounce it, Jamita. That was correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I've gained a better perspective of my purpose.
Okay. Mr. Richard, you're on mute.
I always mute myself and forget I'm muted. Y'all all know what I got. I got a house.
Awesome. Miss Ashanti?
I gained 8 small best friends.
Oh, that's sweet.
Okay. Miss Williams? Is that pronounced Brandwin?
Brandwin,
Brandwin. Okay.
and I've gained a reading and research center here at school.
Sweet. Okay. Mr. Antonio?
I've gained more time to read.
More time to read. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I think if there was one thing I've gained, it's an appreciation for the things that are most important in life. And I've gained a perspective on what's most important to me. So thank you all for sharing. I think that's important because it kind of grounds us as a team, grounds you all as a team and as a unit. And it kind of puts us in a perspective of thinking about, there are the external and outside stressors, but there are always opportunities for our own personal growth and then opportunities for our growth as a staff and as a team. Okay. How are we doing on time? So jumping into it, session goal number 1 is how do we incorporate the lived experiences of our students into the work that we do? So I wanted to spend this time thinking about, right, as an overview, how do we look at our instruction, our planning, our differentiation, and scaffolding as tools of building inequity, building that inequity into the bread of what we do every day. And one of the things that Ms. Lewis tasked me with was talking about how can we be more purposeful in how we bring our students' experiences into the work that we do. This is not necessarily to say that it's not something that's happening in the school, but how can we be more purposeful? So when we talk about the experiences of our students, what do we mean by that? We simply mean their interest, their hopes, recent experiences that they've had. I think being very mindful of where we all are in a pandemic is relatively easy for us at this given point in time because it's something that everyone is experiencing together. But I want us to be mindful of there are experiences that our children still have. Their interests are growing. They are growing as people and individuals. And how do we incorporate those things into the everyday activities, lessons, and conversations that we have as educators? Also being mindful of family dynamics in terms of how those things change. I don't think I have to say this to you all, but our downtime during the lunch periods are always great opportunities for us to catch up and take an inventory of what's happening with our students, okay? And being mindful of what's happening in the middle school, or even for children at the elementary level. Do we have a sense, or do our students have a sense of what their career goals are, as fluid as those might be at times? Do we have a sense of those things, and how can we use that as data to hook our students in terms of the work that we are embarking on? Okay, a point to consider is a quote from Zaretta Hammond. She says that one of the biggest challenges, let me read the quote. One of the biggest challenges I see teachers struggling with is how to operationalize culturally responsive pedagogical principles into culturally responsive teaching practices. So here's the thing. I would love to, I'm begging Ms. Lewis to give me 3 or 4 days to really deep dive into culturally relevant content and culturally relevant pedagogy. We're not necessarily in that space today. We're just going to, as a staff, take our big toe and dip it in the water, okay? One of the things that Gloria Billings-Laston said, Dr. Gloria, as I call her, said is the term culturally relevant content and culturally relevant pedagogy is overused by educators, and it has completely taken away from what she was thinking of when she wrote some of those seminal articles back in the mid-90s. So to that end, when I talk about our students' lived experiences, that is part of what we mean when we say culturally relevant content, with a focus on what's relevant for our students. One of the things we'll do today is how are we bridging the gap between what we know or what we think we know and the practices that we see in our classroom every day. And one of the things I hope to do, we may actually run out of time, but one of the things I hope to do in this time is talk about what are some of the barriers and impediments that get in our way from doing the things that are right here on the forefront of what we think, okay? Okay, we are talking about this notion of centering our children. How do we put our children's experiences, again, at the forefront of what we're doing, okay? We're talking about integrating real world story problems. And I want you all, as much as you possibly can, to take notes on this, because we're going to come back to it and use it when we break into some of our groups. So how are we using what we know about our students to integrate into real world story problems? Bringing in multicultural textbooks. And actually, let me stop there. Ms. Lewis, correct me if I'm wrong, but as the students say, what had happened was we had a conversation when we got together as a team the first time, and we talked about a zero-sum academic game, and we went through an exercise of discussing some of our favorite books that we read in schools, but then looking at books that we read either post-high school, post-college, and how we believe those books to be a part of our personal canon. Can we have a quick conversation around what we have done to infuse more of those texts, if you will? I think I used the term alternative text versus quote unquote classics. Where are we in that space? And that's for anybody, not just Ms. Lewis.
I'll be honest with you guys. I haven't had a chance to go back and do a lot of reading of the books that we talked about. You know, they were the great ones that we wanted to do, because there's just so many other components. I'm working on my PhD. I'm reading a lot of journals, a lot of articles. So I haven't, but I would love to hear what everyone else has been able to do in that space.
Does anyone else want to share? Because I think what's important in this space is that we feel armed to use the information that we have. Does anyone want to share really quickly? Because we can certainly table. Okay, we'll keep going. To be continued. Although I will say, Miss Lewis and Mr. Richard, one of the things I would really like to do moving into the spring, or maybe even this summer, is engage in a full equity audit to see how necessary that even is. So we'll kind of punt that downfield and save it.
Are you talking about our student resources? I might have missed.
So there's two ways to look at it. There is the notion of the trade books that our students are reading. So our fifth graders are reading Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
No, ours read it.
I was in that space. Well, one of the other things we could consider in terms of centering our students, I believe is bullet number 5, is the curriculum materials in general.
Okay.
But I was
Yes.
speaking specifically that the conversation
Oh,
we
yeah.
had.
I missed it. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I was my mind was over there. But we have actually made a concerted effort to build a multicultural library. And so actually Miss Williams has done a really good job adding and sorting through what we have already had, and ensuring that we're but to continue to ensure that there's representation in the books and materials that we're using. So that's
Yeah,
definitely.
it's funny that you happen to ask this question, because just this week we had spent scholastic dollars that we had earned through prior book fairs. And myself, along with some other teachers, I mean, deliberately, we were ordering multicultural books. And I do, just like Mrs. Lewis had just indicated, I have a lot that are in the library now. The ones that I ordered are focused towards middle school. But I do know, I don't know if it was Miss Morace or Miss Gardner, they ordered at least one of them I know of that had to do with hair, Gardner. And then it ended up being like it came in a pack of 6. So she had said to me, I didn't even realize there were 6 books, but I passed them around to other teachers as well. So we're working on it. I also just became a chapter leader. I don't know if you're familiar with Project Lit. It actually originated. Are you?
Yes.
I think we've got like 4 or 5 other chapters in DC. I have not officially started it yet, but that's the entire focus there, is those multicultural books. So we're working on it, Mr. Williams.
No, feel free to use me as a resource. You guys, I just finished helping a school in the city create a plan to revitalize their library, and I have a resource I could send you with multicultural books from K through from pre-K up through 8th grade, and then some evidence-based research on what children believe to be the most read text, if you will. So I can send you that, Miss Williams, no problem. I have it in an email. I can send that to you.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Fantastic.
Thank you for that. So centering our children, integrating real world problems to start over, bringing in multicultural trade books, and then experimenting with peer teaching. And I cannot say enough for really through all levels. I was going to say from 5th through 8th grade, as much as we possibly can when we are in virtual spaces, but even when we are in person, the peer teaching and peer tutoring is super helpful for students in giving them a voice and solidifying what they already know, and then giving other students who may need extra supports the opportunity to hear problem solving and hear content from someone outside of their classroom teachers. To move us forward, introducing new concepts with kid-friendly vocabulary. And then to Ms. Lewis's point, in terms of centering our children, using media and books that positively depict a wide range of cultural and ethnic identities. And that's a distinction from the trade books, the Harry Potter versus Charlie and the Chocolate Factory versus the curriculum materials that we may be using as a school. But I also think to a large degree that includes the teacher paid resources that we buy from Teachers Pay Teachers and Scholastic, and kind of some of the peripheral roads that we use to kind of bring in content. Okay. Also thinking about centering our children, invite guest speakers. If hint, 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 if any of you in terms of the writing process would like to use me as a mystery guest or a mystery Skyper to come in and talk to your class about the writing process or essay writing, I'm more than happy to do this for you. I can't say enough about it. About, I think it was maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I convinced Bubba Wallace to do a mystery Skype with my students. I had a NASCAR / racing thing in my classroom. And I just wanted him to come on and talk about NASCAR for about 2 or 3 minutes. And he came on and he talked about things that happened in high school and how he loved to read and all of these great things. But the overall message that I want to send is, if you're able to find people who are experts in their field or who are interested in the topics that your children are interested in, that's going to build a stronger bond between you and those students. And that is going to, you'll be able to leverage that for student achievement. Okay. Gamifying lessons and activities. We don't have time to go in this, but I have a tool and a protocol that I'm going to send Ms. Lewis, and that will be to help teachers turn activities and lessons into games, okay? Using a suggestion box as a data collection tool, meaning how can we continue to give our students an active voice in what happens in the class? A quick suggestion box is always a good tool to use to figure out what students are thinking, but not necessarily willing to express. So having an anonymous suggestion box can be very helpful. Project-based learning or problem-based learning, taking the materials that we are using, the content that we're having our students engage in, and making it real world. And then Genius Hour and FedEx Day. I'm gonna get on my soapbox for like 30 seconds, if you will. We'll talk about this in details, but thinking about how can we change the structure of what's happening in our classrooms so that our students are front and center. Genius Hour, if you're not familiar with it, is the way I've seen it run and the way I did it was every 2 weeks for an hour, and it was typically on a Wednesday. Students were working on some project that they had an invested interest or an invested passion about. Um, the, 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 the concept is said to come from Google. I believe it came from 3M because some of their best inventions from Scotch, i.e. Scotch tape and Velcro, were inventions that were created by accident by researchers and people in the R&D department who essentially were piddling around and experimenting. So the concept of Genius Hour is giving your students the opportunity to work on something that they're passionate about or to research something that they're interested in. And essentially, I've had students create raps, we've had commercials, a lemonade stand, and all kinds of real world products that come from engaging in Genius Hour. So there are lots of ways to structure it, but I think you have a set time on a particular day, and children have the opportunity to work independently, if they will. Sometimes kids work in groups, and sometimes there are adults in the building who help them out. But in and of itself, it's their opportunity to engage in activities that they're passionate about to the extent that they are building something that they're going to present at a point in time. FedEx Day is a similar concept, but somewhat different. A FedEx Day is where essentially a classroom drops everything that is happening and they work on a specific project for the day. And as I think about it, I should have pictures of this, but one of the things we've done, for instance, on a Friday, the Friday before the King holiday, we had students come up with a series of products that explained who Martin Luther King was, why the day came into existence. I had a group of students who rewrote the lyrics to the Stevie Wonder Happy Birthday song. I had a student who did a monologue of a King speech, and we, as much as we could, we tried to dress him up in the appropriate attire to kind of mimic how King looked. But this is not, when I did my FedEx days, it was something that was spur of the moment. I didn't tell children ahead of time. It was one of those things that we used not as a treat, but it was something that the students always were up for because it broke the monotony of the things that we were doing every day. And for those of you who are middle school teachers, there's a way to collaborate amongst the different core subject teachers where students have the leverage to work on projects, even though, the math block may end at 10:30 and we need to head to ELA or recess or whatever the case may be. So there's some opportunities for teachers to collaborate to, create scheduling that'll work if a particular teacher wants to do that with a group of students. Okay.
I have a question.
Sure.
What about giving students the opportunity to vote on the next topic or historical figure they want to learn about?
I think that's great. When I was when I learned of or had the epiphany of Genius Hour and FedEx Day, I was teaching third graders. I always wanted to limit the options that they had because they would just kind of overwhelm them. But I think that's a great suggestion, and I think it works really well when you have older students.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, I was teaching 8th grade and we had a FedEx Day and I had a group of 8th grade girls. In science, they were reading the Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, and they essentially did tons of research and cranked out about a 4 or 5 page paper on medical experimentation on Black and brown people in the United States. And I was like, where did this even come from? I thought we were gonna, right? Like the goal was we were going to do some investigative reporting on Freeway Ricky Ross, which is an entirely different concept. But at the time, we were reading a book called Trail, and Trail is a book about a girl who lives in Roxbury, Massachusetts, and it's about drugs and a bunch of other cool stuff that kids get into. But she befriends an investigative journalist. So I thought we were going to be discussing investigative journalism. And that group of girls did some work on the Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. And I had a group of boys who did a few skits on Freeway Ricky Ross and all of this other cool stuff. So I think it becomes one of those things where, as an instructor, how do you make it work for you and your students? But choice is always good.
Thank you.
Okay. How we doing? Okay. We're gonna pivot for a second and talk about this notion of bias. And one of the things that the research tells us, and even from my own experiences, as we start to think about the instruction in our classrooms, our lesson planning, our curriculum materials, it can be very difficult to see bias per se. And I think one of the things that's helpful in seeing bias is to kind of think about our own personal biases, okay? So bias is an unchecked inclination. Give me one second. An unchecked inclination or tendencies that favor a group, a person, or a style, etc. These tendencies can sometimes be unconscious, which is called implicit bias. If unchecked, they can lead to inequities that harm certain groups, okay? So for instance, okay, so I'll save my example. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show a video. I'll come back to my example. Can you all see my screen? Okay. I want you, as you watch this video, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to think about the bias, or maybe even the biases that you see coming to the forefront.
Morning. How are you? Cool. So, can we talk about how you got here?
Hey kids, I'm telling you guys right here.
Man, we ain't doing nothing.
Why right here before I'm cooked out?
So, you didn't do anything? Nope. What's all this? So who's reading it? I guess.
Well, looks broken. Skateboarding, huh?
Yes.
Is this the first time you've hurt yourself?
No, I get hurt all the time.
At home?
At home? He hurt himself skateboarding at the park.
Okay, ma'am. I'm going to have a counselor come in and speak with you.
A counselor? For what? He's okay.
Well, I done told you them tricks were going to put you in the hospital.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, too. A nurse will be in a few minutes to help you check out. What's up?
The doctor thought I did this to him.
How you doing?
Hi.
It ain't fair. Fair has nothing to do with this. This is about you taking responsibility for your actions. Look, I know so many young men just like you that didn't do anything. And yet, most of them are in prison.
You don't know me. I ain't going to no prison.
If you don't want to end up in prison, you're going to have to get some new priorities and probably some new friends too. Look, you're not getting any younger. You need to get an education so you can get a good job.
Like you just like everybody else. You think you see, but you don't see. You see what you want to see.
I see what's in this folder. It shows me what you've been doing.
I ain't doing nothing.
I am not doing anything. Stop.
I ain't doing nothing.
I'm not doing anything. And yes, you were. Get to the timeout chair. Now, please. I'm sorry. I am so sorry.
Okay.
Don't you think it's time for everyone to know
Hold on.
if you have any hidden bias, ingrained racism, or implicit bigotry?
Sorry about that. It just repeats itself. So what I want to do is kind of open the floor up and talk about. So I know a guy who did not. He was a principal, nice guy, a strikingly handsome guy, who did not want to hire any teacher candidates who either put their SAT scores or their GPAs on their resume. Now, I'm not saying that person is me, but okay, that's me. Here's a point that I want to make. Each of us have biases. In the video that you saw, that's a kind of a different case than what I brought up about myself. But what I am saying is, going through some bias reduction training, I found out that I have lots and lots of biases. So I want to share another quick story. This was in 2017, and I was finishing a principalship, and you know, assistant principals and principals have books in their office for kids to read. And one of my teachers, his name was David Wingate, he came into my office and he said, Mr. Williams, should kids be reading that? And it was this book. I don't know if you all are familiar with The Five Chinese Brothers. And I said, yeah, this is one of the greatest children's books in the history of children's books. Of course, like this is. He said, I don't know about that, Mr. Williams. And he went behind me because the book was on a bookshelf behind my desk. And he took the book and picked it up. He said, man, I haven't seen this book in a long time, but I'm pretty sure this book is racist, Mr. Williams. And I said, Mr. Wingate, get out of here. It's the Five Chinese Brothers. There's nothing wrong with this book. And he said, well, I don't know. He was like, they all look alike. And I said, well, yeah, they're twins. And he said, yeah, but I don't think Chinese people would draw Chinese people in that light. And when he said that to me, it just, something clicked that hadn't clicked. Certainly when I was a child reading the book, and even like the 3 years prior when I found the book on Amazon. We all have these blind spots, is the point that I'm trying to make. And I think it's very difficult for us. It can be more difficult for us to think about how those blind spots function in terms of our lesson planning and in terms of how we view curriculum and materials if we're not looking at how bias has impacted us individually as human beings, if that makes sense. So really quickly, not quickly, but some common biases that we have. There's the bias of tradition, and each one of us as individuals, as educators, we have a certain amount of tradition bias, this notion of we've all done it this way. And particularly when we are earlier in our teaching careers, we tend to lean on how we were taught and use the content that we were taught as opposed to or in concert with what we learned in our graduate school training or whatever coursework we may have went through. So this notion of tradition bias is one of the reasons why I held on to The Five Chinese Brothers. Like, it was a book that my third grade teacher read to us, and it was a book that my first grade teacher read to us. And it's a great book. And it was one of the first books that I read from cover to blah, 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 right? Confirmation bias. We seek out information that confirms what we already suspect or believe. Language bias, preferences towards the way people speak or the way people present themselves. Speed bias, picking something for the sake of time because we're overwhelmed and we need to make a decision and move on. And then there's this notion of age bias, making decisions based on age and youth. Psychologists say that there are over 180 types of bias. They are absolutely natural. The research tells us that biases exist as a form of muscle memory. It was a survival mechanism that we use to categorize groups of human beings or phenomenon in nature so we could decide whether we should be in flight, whether we should be in freeze, or whether we should be, or whether we would freeze. So think of it as a form of muscle memory. It does not become a problem until it can be problematic if it's hurting groups of people, if it's discriminatory, and if it creates blind spots that hurt us personally and professionally. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second. And what I want to do is I'm going to break us into groups. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put us in groups of 2. And I want to get your reaction. Talk to your partner. How many people do we have here? Get your reaction to the video. And I want you to ask the question, what biases were at play? And how do you think it impacted the educator? And how do you think it impacted the young man in the video? And after that, I want you to, if you are willing to share, talk about some of your own bias. So I talked about my bias towards these high achieving people who put their SAT on their SATs or their grade point averages on their resumes. But talk through, if you're willing, some of the biases that you are conscious of. And then we're going to use that as a mechanism, as a springboard to kind of talk about some content and some curriculum. How are we doing? Okay, I'm going to open up the breakout rooms.
And so the breakout room, you select it. Oh,
Yeah, it's going to ask you to join the room and you just click admit.
Right.
How we doing, group 2?
We're doing okay.
Great.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So yeah, since she makes the video.
Yeah, like instead of trying to figure out what's going on, just trying to ask questions to answer what she believes is going on.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, Mr. Williams,
Hey, how you guys doing this Friday?
We're doing good.
doing all right.
Is it time to go back or?
No, we have a few more minutes.
Okay.
More minutes. Did you two discuss the video?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were talking about different obviously the different biases in it. How the language bias kind of comes up with the educator in particular. You know, constantly correcting the students' speech and you know some of the things that he says, and you know, trying to you know sort of point out grammatical errors or faux pas, I guess. But then also there's a bit of confirmation bias that she's constantly kind of seeking out sort of reasons to think that this kid is going to be a troublemaker or is, a bad student or is something like that.
Yeah, everything you just did.
What do you guys think about that language thing? I find that, I thought that was actually insidious, I think is the word that I want to use. What did you all think about the language correction?
I would say, Jim, as an English teacher, right? Like, I get it because for me, even in my own life, to adults, don't matter who you are, if that happens, like that's something that I would do, right? Because that's a me thing. But also too, that was because of what was instilled in me by my mother, right? When younger, she told me that I wasn't allowed to speak slang, right? And so at all times, I was anytime I would speak anything that was slang or ebonics, I would be quickly corrected. And so that's how I was trained. And so that's why maybe that played a part in a large role in who I became, right? And so that's why, to the point about it being biased, that it happens, but not knowing her, but just taking my own personal situation, being an English teacher, I get that. So just that small thing of it, you know what I'm saying? Because it's like you would just want anybody to say it properly, right? Or grammatically correct.
Let me jump to another group, but thank you all.
Yep.
Another one. Oh, it's too late.
How's it going?
Greetings.
Oh, you joining us. Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, we were just talking about racial bias. And like I was saying how like I have a racial bias towards people that look like me, like not in like a bad way, but like if I'm somewhere unfamiliar, then like I'll gravitate towards people that look like me. If I am watching like the Olympics or something and like I see a Black girl doing something, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna root for her because she looks like me. But it's never in like,
regardless of what country she's from.
yeah, I'm like, okay, we got a Black girl in England, I'm gonna root for her. Like, so yeah, it's just like that's definitely a bias that like I know I have.
She's a Black woman, so I'm gonna yeah. I believe when you read different books on bias, stories of what certain biases are called, or I've heard that called Indian bias. And it's not necessarily discriminatory. It's a natural inclination towards. I'm gonna leave you guys. I'm gonna leave you ladies because it's a bias to say he or guy.
I'm cool with it.
Any other biases?
Well, I had this other one that out myself when the other day.
Yeah.
You may have to add Caitlin Morace back in because she came up here for us to talk and she's heading back down to the classroom, so she may get kicked out.
Okay. Duly noted.
Is that your attic, Senora?
Yes.
I love it. I love it. That would be a great studio. You should turn it into a studio. Or Lolita. Let Lolita go up there and create her art.
She has, could you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, I have, it's just a mess. This article is full of stuff. But I always want to turn it into something like very international place.
Okay. If anyone wants to share out what they shared with their, you can share either what you have with your personal or what you saw in the video, either or both.
sir. We can't hear you.
Yep, the volume went way down.
If we,
So everyone else mute.
we could all.
Okay.
Okay, who's going first?
I'll go first. It was Miss Cindy Nagera and I in the room in the chat, and we were talking about the book that you had on your shelf. I read as a child, right? And so I think in society, everyone has their bias. Whether you go to the ice cream shop and you pick chocolate over vanilla, or strawberry, or and as form of, if you go to the sneaker store and you pick out certain sneakers, that is a form of bias or like or dislike of something, right? But as life evolved, people, what's normal changed to be not right. And so the book cover for the time period may have been right, right? But had it been when the gentleman came in and saw the book cover, had it been, I'm wondering, had it been 5 different Chinese images and then the same title, he may not have seen it, because people preconceived notion about images and what's right and what's not right at the time they see it in generations. It's kind of like encapsulate, like during this time period, this was acceptable. And when you're right sizing something for the moment, like you want to be, I want to say not politically correct, but correcting the tendencies that people have to judge accordingly to their tendencies, that may have been like, okay, we know this is wrong today, but we weren't exposed to, because with the Eurocentric mindset back then, it's a continue. But when it's more towards the center of holistic thinking of things, then you say, oh yeah, looking at from that perspective, it's more of a appreciation of a culturally acceptable, entity. Like, we shouldn't do this because this culture will be affected from that. So I was sharing with Garrett, like, I thought the book was good in content. It was like almost like the 3 Little Pigs. If you build your house with straw, this happened. But I couldn't remember like the exact, each person has the role, but I know it was a life lesson. As a child, I had thought that was the whole concept of the 5 brothers, right? More like the 3 Little Pigs or Goldilocks or the 7, all these childhood stories that we read. It's like a message. The moral of the story is type situation, if I'm correct. But getting back to biases, or the images that we saw in the short film, I was telling Ms. Senator Nagera that the perception was that a black couple with a child going to the park. It depends on the park, because if that park was like a New York with a multicultural environment, it might not have been the same outcome. But it's just pointing out the biases, the soft biases that people need to see, so it doesn't turn into a Karen moment, if you will. Like, oh, this park, my daughter and I are playing on this ride, and here these couple came with their child, and they weren't accepting. She was more in fear of her child talking to the young lady on the who said the rocking horse. I forgot even, it's been a while since I've been in that category of having a little child like that. So and then when the doctor examined the boy from a skateboard accident, he wasn't quite believing the child. And I was telling Mr. Nagera that might have been the first time he went to that doctor, because it wasn't a family doctor, because the family doctor would have known more about the family and their makeup. And then when he saw the dad and heard what the dad said, then it kind of changed his perception. But it's more of like, in that scenario, I thought that, he didn't believe them because he may not have known the family. And it might have been like they go into the emergency room, and doctors are trained much like teachers to kind of like look at the bigger picture. Yes, you say the obvious, a skateboard accident, but you still have to wonder, like, was it really a skateboard accident? If it's the first time you're being exposed to that family or to that incident. And, you know, because the child was leading the discussion and the mother kind of chimed in, but it's like he asked them twice to make sure the story was correct. In essence, like, but you could see that the mom was like, you don't believe me what I said? Because, you know, she was like, well, you should take my word because I'm the mom. But I know I've been, as an educator, I've been in a situation where similar to that, but you look at the child, you know, what happened, and then the mother or the parents' expression, you kind of felt like there was some kind of uneasiness, like, did this really happen? And I didn't want to probe further because, you know, it was kind of hard for a child to bump into a wall with a black eye. You know what I mean? Like situation like that. So, but I mean, you know, certain situations I could see, well, in my opinion, the films that we just saw, I was thinking like, you know, what would, if the roles were reversed? Like Irv Gotti, he has a show on BET where he showed like an alternative world, right? Where the roles reverse. So a black doctor, white couple, the similar scenario, and it's kind of like shaped in your thinking about different events. So you go to the park, black couple, white child coming with their parents, the black couple move because it's like we just saw, but it's like a twist to it where the dominant culture is black people and the minorities are white people. So it was like, you know, showing like the biases coming from that perspective, like the parallels, like, you know, if it was this, could we be like that? You know? Yeah, we can't hear you.
I'm muted, Desmond.
You said a lot there, but I wrote down the tendency to judge based on our tendencies. And I think that's part of the reason why we're kind of going down so we can dip back up, is to think about the tendencies, if you will. Does anyone else want to share either reaction to the video or a bias that you may have?
Yes, I'll share. It was me and Branwen, Miss Williams, and react to the video. There were 4 biases that I saw in the video that we saw. The first was when they were at the store, the presumption that they were stealing, that they were loitering outside of the store. The second was the hospital. They assumed that the parents were getting abused. The child was getting abused. The playground, this blatant prejudice, does not want to be for a child to play with a black child. And the last one at the school, when he was falsely blamed and then punished. All that negatively shaped him and shaped the way he thought because of these things that happened to him. And you had asked the question, how did the educators feel? And I took the stance from the teacher that like blamed him in that classroom. If you're not aware, you have no thought about it. If you're not conscious, you have no thought about it. And to me, if you're not enlightened, and enlightened to me means to learn, to acknowledge, to take accountability, and to change. If you're not enlightened, you can't change. Everybody has prejudice. I have so many. And the more I'm enlightened, the more I take accountability, I can change those things. But just like the people down at the White House, they thought that they were doing the right thing. To me, they're not enlightened. You're not enlightened if you base things off of the wrong things. And to me, like, you're just not enlightened. But that has to be a place that you have to get to also, a place of enlightenment so that you can change your prejudices.
Thank you for sharing that, Jamita. The research tells us that the anti-bias or bias reduction trainings only work. They don't work in isolation. There has to be coaching, unless there's just like a moment. So in this particular moment, we had interviewed a candidate that I actually really, really, really liked. And when I turned to the last page, I mean, this dude was like 40 years old, and he had his GPA score and his SAT score, and I was like, I'm not hiring this guy. That's just like the most asinine thing you could do. And my assistant principal was like, what's the hang up? What's the big deal? And I was like, that's like saying you dated the prom queen or something. Like, who does that? But it took her to put a mirror in front of me and say, dude, Desmond, that's like a hang up that's hurting our building, because that candidate was so much more qualified and skillful, even in an interview, than the other, I think, 2 or 3 candidates that we had already interviewed. But I was already ready to go to person 2 because of that hang up. So go ahead, Miss Noguera.
I'm sorry, I don't understand. What do you mean? So do you don't like people that put the GPAs and the grades on the resume? I
You're
cannot.
muted, Desmond.
Not to go into too much detail, but we're kind of told that that's something your GPA and your SAT score mean more when you have less work experience. But as you kind of get to your second professional job, it's not something you put on a resume. So in my eyes, it was the equivalent of a typo, if that makes sense.
So I'm gonna piggyback onto that, come back to it. So in life you were taught to show these things, like put them on your resume, and that was more of I think that was more of showing your qualifications. Let your qualifications speak for you before seeing you. You know what I mean? So in that notion, I believe that that person was trying to show you who they were before you saw them, or before, because it's like that way. I know a lot of people who do that. Now the shift may be to not do that anymore, but I'm pretty sure there were times when you have done that in your education process. So I don't know, but I don't want to belabor that, because I know you said we don't want to go that way, but I just think that when the gentleman told you, or whoever you spoke with your vice principal shared that with you, like that was a hang up with you, you saw that that was a bias that you have, like, why did this dude need to put this GPA and summa cum laude and thank you Lordy on his GP and his resume, and he may not have been aware that you don't do that anymore. You know what I mean? So I think that that collaborative effort that you had with talking to your vice principal about that, it let you see that you had a bias in that area also, and that you shared with us. But I was like, I do that myself. Like, I want people to know that this is yada, because that's what you was told to do. The expectation is to put it there, and no one haven't told us not to do that, or that was not the standard anymore. Like, like the thing to look for anymore in society. Like,
let's do this, Mr. Smith, because we're pressed for time. I see
right.
Antonio has his hand raised, Mr. Antonio, and then Mr. Richard, and then Ms. Lucas. So Antonio, Richard, and Ms. Lucas. I'm gonna mute myself.
I just wanted to say, to the point about biases. I was watching. I'm not sure if everyone is familiar, but I was watching a Trevor Noah interview, and he interviewed the 2 authors of the book Rising Out of Hatred, and they were former white nationalists. And he asked them a question about how do you come to grip, how do you rationalize to yourself that you went from something so extreme to another extreme, but now for yourself having the confidence that what you now believe is right, because what you used to believe was so wrong, right? He asked him, how do you now have any sense of comfort that what you now believe is true, or what is right? And I forgot the guy's name, but what he said was, before, I was thinking about all the things that I was thinking, my entire thought process was about one group. Everything I thought about was one group. And yes, I still have trouble with understanding if what I now believe is right. But the way that I make my decisions is whatever I do, whatever I say, however I'm reacting to something, am I doing it to help or benefit the most people? If whatever I do is done to benefit the most people, whatever decision I make, whether or not it's right or wrong, it may not be the right way to go about it, but my decision can't be wrong. What I believe cannot be wrong because I'm thinking about only helping the most people that I can. And I think if obviously with that kind of mindset, it could, even if you have certain biases, right, it could alleviate some of the issues that come with it.
Go ahead, Richard.
Caitlin and I talked about two things. The first thing that we talked about was how our biases are based on, for just out, this was a idea that we both have, is how our biases are based on manners for us, the common ones that we have. They're based on manners and public manners. And that is, that was a good little conversation we had. But the second one, it was about our classrooms and how, I'm going to talk more about my situation. When I first started teaching here, the population of the school, it was mixed, but it was still primarily white. And over the years, our population has changed. And the library in my classroom was very similar, probably, to the library that you had in your office. But now that now that our population has changed, my whole library in my classroom has changed, and I'm purposely trying to find books that my students can relate to. You know, not that they can't relate to Molly Lou Mellon, but not too many of our students look like Molly Lou Mellon. So I'm trying to find books that my students can relate to. Oh, and one other thing, we were talking about, we're learning about Romare Bearden in 8th grade. And this conversation reminded me of a conversation I had years ago when I taught Romare Bearden. And the class was probably, I can't remember if it was a large class or a small class, but they were talking, and someone, and this was a Black student, said, "Why is Romare Bearden painting pictures of Black people?" And I was, you know, kind of bristled at that, and I was like, "Well, why are you asking that question?" And they said, "Well, because he doesn't look Black." I was like, "My dear, he is Black. He's painting paintings of his race." And that was I can't really remember how in depth the conversation went, but that was pretty much an important conversation that we had that day in class. That was years ago, but today's conversation reminded me of that situation with Romare Bearden.
Okay. Thank you all for sharing. I'm gonna move us on. So in looking at different biases, we're going to pivot somewhat. One of the things Ms. Lewis asked me for, she said, "Desmond, you have to give them something to take away. You have to give them something to take away." So here is one of my gifts to you is the Myra Sacker's 7 Forms of Bias in Curriculum. This is, in curriculum materials, but I also think it applies to individual lesson plans as well. And what this does is it works as a tool to help us look at the biases and the inadequacies within individual lesson plans, maybe even our unit plans, if you will, and then curriculum, out of the box curriculum materials that we might use. So I'm going to read through this, and then we'll have an activity where you'll get the opportunity to try to use the 7 forms of bias in action, with the hope that I'll hopefully, Miss Peltier, it's something maybe I could coach us through a team leader meeting, or maybe a grade level meeting or something along those lines. We can talk more in depth about how some of these biases work to help you all make decisions about different materials that you may use. But I think more importantly, in terms of low hanging fruit and points of leverage, is how we can think thoughtfully about the individual lessons that we're writing and using on a day-to-day basis. Okay. So the first form of bias is this notion of invisibility. And that means that groups are excluded from the conversation. And I recall not wanting to teach out of a history book that I was given when I was actually teaching at a school once upon a time. And my contention with this particular book was a world history book. I can't think of the history period, but every group in the book besides white people was mentioned under the umbrella of when they were discovered by Europeans. So this notion of invisibility, stereotyping, and its material, material that assigns a rigid set of characteristics to a group. Sacker says that stereotyping is a shortcut to bigotry, if you will. Then there's imbalance and selectivity, and that's only telling half of the story. And one of my favorite examples is this notion of I had I don't know if you recall in a book, but I had a parent who said to me, "Mr. Williams, you're teaching George Washington Carver, but when are you going to teach George Washington? You're prejudiced against George Washington." And I said, "Lady," I'm going to use the term lady because I don't want to say her name. I said, "I'm not prejudiced against George Washington." I said, when we teach George Washington, we have to teach everything, or more of what, take a more holistic approach to who George Washington is. Okay? And then unreality is this notion of ignoring the negativity that's part of a story. So I was listening to, well, I won't go into depth, but this idea of women's suffrage being 100 years old, but not necessarily talking about the fact that women's suffrage in I believe it was 1920, was only granted to Caucasian women, and ignoring the fact that women of color did not have the right to vote at that point in time. So that's a notion of the bias of unreality. Moving forward, continuing, linguistic bias is not taking into account the rich cultural legacies of other groups. And then in the writing, assuming, and I can't remember what group I was in, but assuming that when we are talking about groups as a whole, we use the term he as opposed to the term she. And I do this all the time. I use the term guys to refer to a group that is mixed gender. Or sometimes I'll use the term guys when referring to a group of women, right? So I'm working on it. But as I said, I have tons of biases. It's pretty bad. Then cosmetic bias. Cosmetic bias is strictly pertains to the curriculum materials, and it is unsubstantive changes that we make to the text. So we may put a picture of a George Washington Carver or Booker T. Washington or a Martin Luther King on the cover of a book, but there's no real mention of an African experience, an African American experience, the experience of indigenous people or other people of color, so on and so forth. So bias is covered up because of how the product or content is marketed, but in reality, there's no substantive change. Then fragmentation and isolation, only discussing part of the history of a group. For instance, in our textbooks, you might see in a science book, there's a did you know section that has 10 inventions by Latino Americans or the Latinx community, but there is no other mention of their contributions to science. So that's fragmentation in isolation. I know I went through that really, really quickly. What I'm going to do, I'm going to stop sharing again. And we're going to watch another video. If I can figure out where I am. We're going to watch another video. And we'll watch the video and we'll discuss what biases we see based on the SATCR 7. And then we'll come back and share out your reactions to that. How are we doing? My clock says it's 2:03. We have about an hour. I think we'll finish a few minutes early, but how are we doing? Thumbs up, thumbs down? You want me to stop? Be quiet? Okay, I'm gonna play the video, and after we share out the video, we'll take a 2-minute stretch break, and then we'll go into our stretch run, if you will. Okay.
Join Kids Hat family. Tofu, please finish your breakfast first.
No, I want to play first. I don't like it anyway.
Tofu, it is not nice to leave your food like that. You should be thankful to your food and eat it respectfully. The first Thanksgiving. This is a very old story. It is from the year 1620, when a group of pilgrims came from Europe in a ship called the Mayflower to the east coast of United States. We have reached this new land, and we shall make it our home now. Let us call it Plymouth.
Yes, and this big rock by which Plymouth is recognized will be called the Plymouth Rock. We shall make a settlement here.
And so the pilgrims got busy trying to make a settlement in their new home. But they had arrived in the peak of winter with little resources and no food.
Oh, this is such a difficult winter. We have almost no food. The men go and catch whatever fish they can find in the freezing lakes, but it is not always enough.
Yes, and a sickness has taken over our people.
We have lost so many strong men and women already. It is very difficult without proper food and supplies to take care of them.
Yes, look at what happened to our brother James Chilton and his wife. They've both died, leaving behind little Mary Chilton.
Poor Mary, she's only 13 years old, but without her mother and father to take care of her, we will have to make sure she is safe. And so Mary was taken under the care of all other pilgrims. But it was a hard sickness, and people died from extreme cold, lack of food, and the sickness that had come over their settlement. This meant Mary had to work hard. Many of the older women amongst the pilgrims had died, and the remaining work had to be shared by everyone. Mary took care of cooking and laundry for the men and boys whose wives or mothers had died. Then one day in March, two strangers called Samoset and Squanto visited the settlement. They were native Indians who lived on the land.
Hello, settlers. Welcome to your new home. Thank you. Who are you? I am Samoset. I am the leader of the Abenaki people, and this is Squanto from the Wampanoag tribe. Hello, Samoset and Squanto. How is it that you speak such good English?
I have had experience with other settlers who know English.
We see that we are having trouble with food. Squanto here can teach you how to grow food on this soil.
And so the pilgrims made new friends and learned how to grow food in their new home. They learned that using fish as fertilizers will help their crops grow better. With the help of Squanto and the other people of his tribe, the pilgrims grew a healthy crop of beans, pumpkins, and corns. To celebrate the harvest, the pilgrims invited King Massasoit of the Wampanoag tribe to the feast. King Massasoit's men helped the settlers hunt for the feast. And large feast of corn, roasted meat, pie, fruits was laid. The pilgrims dedicated this day to getting together with friends and family and thanking God for the abundance of good food and loving people in our lives.
I get it now, dear. We should be thankful for the abundance of food we have. I shall respectfully eat whatever is served to me.
That is so wonderful, Tofu. I am proud of you. For your favorite rhymes, stories, and more, join Kit.
Okay. So what we're going to do, I am going to go back a few slides so that you can see the Sadker 7. One of the drawbacks of not being in person is I can't give you that worksheet, but I'm going to pair us up, talk about the biases you see in the video, and then we'll come back and share out. Okay? How we doing? Okay, I'm sharing my screen.
Hey,
Hi, Miss Caitlin.
are you my person today?
I didn't think I was, but I can be. Did you enter a breakout room?
I didn't get anything that said a breakout room.
So yeah, you can. I'll be your partner. 'Cause I'm sharing my screen, so I can't tell. So
Oh, okay. Yeah, I didn't get it. I got it last time, but I didn't get it this time.
okay, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Okay, so this one is tough. Do you see any of the biases at play?
Well, it kind of plays off of what Mr. Kreitling and I were saying earlier in our first meeting, because it kind of brought it out again. We noticed that in a lot of movies or shows or books that the women are blonde, blue eyes, super tiny, big chested. And that's what I was noticing in the video, that the girl that they brought in was this beautiful, I mean, I know she's a cartoon, but like
Oh,
a beautiful.
you should see this other video. She looks like it's a first Thanksgiving video. Mary looks like Jessica Rabbit.
Really?
Yeah,
No way.
way.
That's crazy. Yeah. Okay. So that's my thing. I'm like, okay, so like they over sexualize women by making them have the perfect hair, the perfect face, the perfect body, which is a tiny waist and big butt, big boobs, all that stuff. And they're doing that even in kid videos. Like that girl was beautiful. She looked perfect cleaning and cooking, and the other lady looked kind of ragged. But then they kind of brought in the younger girl who had the perfect face. So it's just that bias of that kind of look that women should have, even in a kid video. So that was my takeaway from that.
Okay.
And then also my other thing I noticed is we all know the real story about Thanksgiving or the first Thanksgiving. They did have the funny or the nice feast, and then it turned into a massacre. So I feel like when I'm teaching first grade or even younger, I don't know how to finish that history without, because I don't want to lie to them, but I also don't want to be like, and they were all murdered at the end of the story, So for me, I have to talk, that you made a good point. I need to figure out how to do that. So I guess I'm doing the like the imbalance by telling only half the story to my kids.
Yeah, and I'm a toggle back and forth so people can see, but I would disagree with you to the degree that lots of us don't know the full story.
Oh, good to know. Okay, to be honest with you, Mr. Desmond, yeah, if that's okay to call you that. I didn't either until I was teaching it, and another teacher told me later. She was like, "You're making it sound so happy," and I was like, "It is a happy story." Yeah. And she was like, "It's not, Caitlin," and I was like, "Oh." So I was taught by her because I, like myself, I thought it was a happy story too. So I'm teaching what I know because I guess I technically don't really know the full story, and I don't want to tell them lies or give them false information,
Yeah, I had I'll spill the beans, so you can't tell the story when we come back together.
Stop it.
Only about 5 years ago, I had just gotten married, and I called a female friend, and she's like, "Yeah, I'm gonna be here in DC for the holiday." She's from Atlanta, and I said, "Why don't you just come have Thanksgiving with us?" And she said, "Thanksgiving? I don't celebrate Thanksgiving. I'm not gonna celebrate the slaughter of the indigenous people of this world." And I said, "What are you talking about, girl?
Yeah, right?
Don't you be talking about my like that?" But she sent me some videos and some articles and some things like that, and I was like, and
honestly, to tell you the truth, I mean, it was probably about like 3 years ago for me too, when she was like, "No, they were slaughtered." And I was like, and I've gotten a great education, but I was always taught part of the story, so I was never taught the full story. So I've been teaching the part I was taught. So
yeah, and that goes back to that notion of a tradition bias. I
true. Yeah.
And I teach how I was taught.
Yeah.
It's natural, but one of our big takeaways is going to be, if we perpetuate what was already there, we're gonna perpetuate the prejudice, the half truths, you know.
Right. Because I want to be able to tell my kids that now, but I need to know how to do it in the proper way.
Yeah, well, so one of
Because
the
they're
things,
6. So
one of the things I'm asking Miss Lewis is for us to do a full equity audit,
okay.
because we might decide, and you all would have to bring your parents in. So when I say we, I really mean you all as a community.
Right.
But you all would decide, you know, what do we value? What's the input from our parents? And maybe it's in 2nd grade that we tell a full and more complete story.
Right, exactly. Because what do you tell your Savannah, right, is your daughter?
Mhm.
Have you told her about the story Thanksgiving?
Yes.
The whole story?
Yes.
Okay.
She doesn't, and that's my own.
No,
She's
of course.
she's
Yeah.
not ready for it. That's my own.
Yeah, no, of course. I was just, because again, I don't want to, and again, some parents might be angry if I'm like, so that's why you're right. So you're right. For parents, what grade do they want their children to really know the full story?
Yeah, I remember I was this is the beginning of my career as a teacher, and it was a big deal. It was like April, Caitlin,
Yeah.
and one of a 1st grader
Mm-hmm.
told a group of other 1st graders that there was no Santa Claus, and this kid broke down and started crying, and you kind of expect those conversations to happen,
Yep.
Thanksgiving-ish leading up to the holiday, but it was April, and it was a big deal. And a parent, as I recall, and I was just a classroom teacher, and this is a huge school.
Yeah.
A parent came up to the school and she cursed out our principal and yada 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 yada. Because like we have to make decisions about what that looks like for us as a school community, and if parents want to tell their children that, then how does that shape and influence the rest of the community?
Exactly. I remember when I was in 3rd grade, someone told me how babies were made, and my mom flipped flipped out. Yeah. Because she was like, oh my gosh, you're in 3rd grade and you were just told how babies are made? No, not okay.
Yeah, my personal.
Now it's from like another student telling me. So my mom came in and I think she actually called the mom and was like, your daughter's spreading this. You really need to make sure that she's not spreading this.
Yeah, and it becomes a, as a parent, the question is, if we're old enough to lie to our kids, we're old enough to tell them the truth. But schools are political places.
Yeah.
So we have to take a stance and be intentional as a school community.
Right. Exactly.
So I'm gonna toggle back and forth, and then I'm gonna give people one more second. But there's also your point is, and again, what we don't see, because in that other video, which I was gonna show, you could plainly see that.
Plainly see, yeah.
Like she has long eyelashes, and she's I wouldn't say she's curvy, but she has a very small waist.
Very small waist, yeah.
And I was like, oh, and she didn't have on lipstick, but she was kind of voluptuous. And the first thing that came to my mind was Jessica Rabbit. She had blonde hair.
Yeah.
And the eyelashes. I was like, wow, that's. And
not the most realistic. So.
Yeah, and the men and even the Indians who were bare chested weren't overly muscularized like action figures.
Yeah.
But that girl was.
But she was like the ideal person.
Yeah, in terms of what men have described as the ideal body type for women.
Yeah, it's sad.
So how are we doing on time? I gotta bring us back together. Oh yeah, we're running out of time. I'm going to stop my share so
I'll go back into my room.
So I can close the breakout rooms.
Perfect. Well, it was nice talking to you.
Yes, ma'am. Good talking to you.
Thank you.
I'm glad to hear it. Okay, so a little background info for you.
Yeah.
It's always interesting how quickly people decide to come back to the breakout rooms. Is it like, oh, session's over, click, versus, no, we're going to use this.
Well, it cut us off in the middle of what we were talking about.
I was by myself, so I was. You have a good conversation with yourself, Richard. I do that enough. At home, I'm like talking to myself all the time. I don't need to do it at school.
As long as you don't answer, you're still sane.
Yes, that's what my mama said. Don't answer yourself.
Actually, I believe answering yourself is the beginning of wisdom.
Desmond, you had to put your volume up, sir. I cannot hear you.
Yeah, you're very soft.
You're so soft-spoken, and you're not a soft-spoken person.
Hold on.
Yeah.
I think it just may be, if we could all mute ourselves.
Yeah, let's all mute.
How's that? Okay, so disclaimer, and we're running out of time, so I'm gonna move us as quickly as I possibly can. I'm not attempting to take away anyone's Thanksgiving. That's my disclaimer. But I would like to hear from you all. What were some of the SATCR 7? What were some of the biases that you saw if we were using that video as a learning tool for our students? What say you?
Well, first of all, I would like to note like the skin tone of the Native Americans, like how you saw that guy, one of the Native Americans was blatantly red and some of them were yellow. And I was like, I don't think I've ever seen a person who's physically been red or physically yellow like that. So to me, that was a very inaccurate representation. And that also kind of played into the certain stereotypes we have all heard. And also the fact of the matter of it kind of, that video ignored like the experience of how the Native Americans were actually treated. As we all know, I mean, there was, when the Europeans first came over here, they enslaved Native Americans, and that was ignored, and that was completely washed over. And I think that, nowadays as teachers, we can't really just teach the students, not only the good, positive, we can't make things look pretty. We've got to be honest with them about what really happens. And that's going to include, talking about some of the uglier parts of things. And yeah.
Reality.
Right.
Reality, and then the imbalance. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. Someone else? I saw, was it Miss Noguera? Your hand was up, and then Miss Lewis.
Yeah, I saw the same thing like Sarah, that they show that the natives have blue eyes and we don't have blue eyes. Like native people don't have blue eyes, and we are hairless. We don't have they don't like the pure native. They don't have hair in their face, and also like they didn't show like nothing of the way the Native Americans were treated by the people that conquered America.
You're muted again, Desmond. Mr. Williams.
So that's that imbalance again. Okay. Miss Lewis and then Caitlin.
I just wanted to share, where I'm from in Boston, it's the Wampanoag tribe. That's where they inhabited. And so growing up, the streets were named, like one street is named Massasoit, one's Wachusett, but it doesn't mean that there's any discussion or talk or thought about what the Wampanoag people went through. And it's just now becoming a part of some of the curriculum in Massachusetts. But one thing I did notice, those videos are based from India, which I think is interesting. The hut videos and things like that. And one thing I noticed about not only was Squanto red, but then Massasoit, who was the king, was blue-eyed and light and had white skin. And so I think that also speaks to the Eurocentric, just if I could say Eurocentralization, if that was a word, but the constant, if someone is smart, if someone is powerful, if someone invented something, then usually they're depicted as either light or white. And that happens in history, in religion, in every area. So I think that's one thing that really stood out to me was that, and Squanto, and just seeing that piece, I thought that was jarring to me as well. And I guess that would be the unreality piece was that the houses were warm and that they were just all working really hard and they learned how to fit. I mean, the harshness, the reality of who helped who and why and how, and then who was deceived, right? Who was the good guy, who was the bad guy. And I said, the fact that facts can be so blurred and how uncomfortable it makes people, because when you tell someone that maybe the pilgrim wasn't, I was telling Mr. McHale, if the pilgrim wasn't the good guy, then that means that in second grade, I didn't have the featured role, and I was the pilgrim. I was excited, right? So now I'm realizing maybe that wasn't the case. And that speaks to people's core. Like, are you saying that, so you're really dismantling the way that people have been taught to think generation after generation, and that's difficult.
Anyone else? Go ahead, Miss Caitlin.
I was sorry. I was just gonna say that going off of what Miss Nagara said and to go off of what Richard was said earlier, just with the blonde hair, blue eyes, and what I noticed, I guess, because it's like the figure of women. And just how like that girl, as I told Desmond, even though she's a cartoon, she was very, very attractive. So it was like, wow, a skinny waist, big, bosoms and booty. And so it's just funny that like, that's what people think of a perfect female, even in a cartoon, they still portray that. So it's just kind of unfortunate that that's how, even back in that day, that they were still portraying women to be that size when that's not real.
So there was another hand. Yeah, I think this exercise is very, I like to use this video because it's politically charged. Like, it forces a school community to really think about the decisions they make around their values as a community. But there's some things that are just completely wrong. There was no rock per se. We didn't land on Plymouth. There is no rock. But I think the other thing too, I believe Sarah and
There's a rock.
Hello? Say that again.
I said it's not. I've been to Plymouth Plantation. There's a rock.
They didn't hit a rock.
No, they didn't hit the rock, but there is a Plymouth Rock. I'm just saying, I'm sorry. But there is, I've seen it at the Plymouth, I've been there. The Plymouth Rock.
She's saying, Desmond, Mr. Williams.
Because everything I've said was that they did.
Everything else is correct. Keep going, Mr. Williams. I'm sorry. But I'm just saying there actually is a Plymouth Rock.
Yeah. The other thing that I found interesting that I think Ms. Lewis and Sarah were pointing to was Squanto's skin tone. But I thought it was very interesting in the video where they said, "Oh, how did you learn to speak such great English?" And because he was kidnapped by the settlers, if you will, and he was taken to, I want to say Spain. I could be wrong, but he was taken. He spent a lot of time in England, but I think he also spent some time in Spain. But that's how he learned. That's how he learned English. The other thing that I found, but that was just completely glossed over. And then to Caitlin's, and I think some of the other points is, where does the conversation about this concept of the slaughter, like where does that conversation happen? And as I was saying earlier, I think that the equity audits are super important. And Caitlin and I were saying, you know, if I'm a first grade teacher or a kindergarten teacher, is it appropriate for me to say, okay, kids, I know it's Thanksgiving and I love you. I know you love turkey, but you're kind of celebrating 700 people being slaughtered. And that includes men, women, and maybe that's not the conversation we're having in kindergarten, but should we be intentional as a staff about when we tell the full story? And I think that's why equity audits become super important, because we might decide we bring in our parents, other stakeholders, and we sit down as a team and we say, you know, our units of study are going to look like this. And then we have conversations about how intentional we're going to be with this storytelling so we can give students a full story. I think the only other point that I wanted to make was this notion of the term pilgrim. Who we call pilgrims were considered to be religious outcasts and heretics. Why King James thought of them that way, I think, is a different story, but they're never really discussed under that umbrella. So I think that could potentially lead to a conversation about this notion of Orwellianism, or further research on why King James made the decision, you know what, these people are heretics, and why some of the original pilgrims went to Holland and then went from Holland west to the New World. Okay, how we doing? I know I talk too much. We do not have much time left. I have one more very important activity for us. I wanted to take a stretch break, but I'm kind of concerned we're gonna run out of time. So can we just keep going? Okay, I'm going to reshare my screen. And we had our discussion of the first Thanksgiving. That's our stretch break. I want to talk very quickly about differentiation. I hope we all bought one lesson here, because what we're going to spend the rest of our time doing is thinking about how we can be more intentional with our differentiation, but how we can also eliminate some of the barriers that can make differentiation plausible and feasible in terms of how we plan for groups of students. Okay. What is differentiation? I'm gonna skip that slide and give a definition from Dr. Carol Tomlinson. Differentiation is the learning environment, the curriculum, assessment, instruction, and classroom management. We typically talk about differentiation in a very myopic view, specifically the instruction. But Dr. Tomlinson is saying the environment, curriculum, assessment, instruction, and management all play a part in terms of meeting students in their learning styles. So when I spoke earlier about FedEx days versus genius hours, those are variations in the environment, if you will, that kind of change not only what students are doing, but change the environment and how they're producing it. And then Professor Hattie I believe this quote is from The Visible Learning of Teachers, Not Just Visible Learning. He says, note that differentiation relates more to addressing students' different phases of learning, from novice to capable, and then from capable to proficient, rather than merely providing different activities to different groups of students. Okay. And what that means is I wanted to emphasize that how we differentiate for a student who is doing well in class or has mastered or is close to mastering a particular concept is very much different than how we differentiate for a student who is struggling with a particular concept or a particular skill. Okay. This model here is a reiteration of the slide that I skipped. and it talks about differentiating from the perspective of content, process, product, and assessment, environment, to the degree that we're considering students' readiness, interests, which we talked about earlier, in terms of centering students and their interests in the learning. Okay. Really quickly about scaffolding. Scaffolding is a series of supports used by teachers to aid students in their learning. This is done by systemic incorporation of students' prior knowledge, their prior experiences, and additional instructional materials and techniques that can support the learning. Okay. Some of the elements of scaffolding could be using or leaning on student experiences to help them understand the concept, breaking concepts or activities into smaller parts, modeling for students. I put in parentheses this notion of a fishbowl method. A fishbowl method is where you use your entire class and they circle around a group of students, and that group of students, whether it's, I would recommend between 2 and 4, they model something. So I would use a fishbowl method to model think, pair, share, turn and talks, and things of that nature. Giving students talk time and then extra time to process information, and then front loading vocabulary for different conversations or different readings that may happen. I know I'm going kind of fast, but just bear with me. Okay. So we're going to play a game. It's called Flip My Lesson. And what we're going to do in Flip My Lesson, teachers, I hope you bought, if you will, or have a lesson plan handy. What we're going to do is we're going to upgrade or flip this lesson, and we're going to add either differentiation or more differentiation. I don't want to assume that the lesson that you have doesn't have any differentiation in it. So I was quick to point out here even more differentiation. I want you to think about a variation on the content, the process, product, the environment, or assessment. So sometimes when we think about, lots of times when we think about differentiation, we tend to think about helping students produce a different product, but we could also deliver the content differently, which is what we mean by process, or the students can be asked to produce a different product, whether it be a commercial, an essay, a speech, something along those lines. Then I want you to think about who is benefiting. Are children moving from novice to capable, or are they moving from capable to proficient? And then what inequities are you breaking through your differentiation? So to help you with that, I have a protocol here. We'll come back to this slide, hopefully. But there's an article on EdSurge that says that teachers, when surveyed, said the biggest barriers to differentiation are time and resources. So my hope is that down the line, we can have another conversation about, once we kind of delve into the differentiation that we're doing as a school, what are some other resources that need to be brought to bear? Or maybe that resource might be instructional materials, but it might be more coaching, whatever the case might be. Okay, so this is really hard to see, but this is a protocol that I came up with. You have a lesson plan, and what we're going to do is we are going to use the lesson plan that we have, but we're going to make some changes to it, thinking about who's benefiting, what instructional inequities are we breaking, and what changes am I making to my product, process, content, environment, or assessment. This is really hard to see. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to reshare my screen. That's going to have this protocol in a Word document so that everyone can see it. What I would advise us to do, I'm going to place us back in groups for the sake of time. I think it may make sense for teachers to share one lesson. So if I were working with Caitlin, I would say, okay, Caitlin, what lesson do you have? And she could say, oh, we're adding 2 by 1 digit numbers. And I would say, okay, let's use that lesson and let's think about how we could differentiate that, as opposed to you working in teams. And I help Caitlin with her lesson, give her feedback, and then she helped me with my lesson and give me feedback. We'll just use, between you and your partners, think of one lesson and we'll go from there. Hopefully we'll have time to share out. But again, one of the things that I'm hoping is that I'll be able to help and support with the coaching, to help alleviate some of the barriers, and then to kind of help us think through how we can make this a more organic process so that in our planning, we're breaking some of those inequities. Because what eventually happens is part of our bias is to teach to the middle. And when we're teaching to the middle, we're perpetuating the inequities. If those students who are not in the middle, whether they be at the top or the bottom, they're not getting everything that they need. Okay. So I'm going to shut up. I'm going to reopen the breakout rooms, and then I'll share the protocol as a Word document so everyone can see it. Okay. Okay, the breakout rooms are opening. Caitlin, I'm gonna place you. So I stole you from Richard. I'm gonna place you back with Richard. Okay. You're on mute.
I can always work with Miss Williams because she's not with anyone and she's in my classroom with me.
Okay. You and Miss
Or Richard, whatever works for you, but she doesn't have anyone either.
Can I put the three of you together?
Yeah, sure, that could work. Interesting.
And then Miss Nelson or Miss Williams? Miss Williams, can I put you? I want to put you in room 7, but it's not there. Miss Williams, I'm sorry, I didn't assign you a room. Can you hear me?
Miss Williams, I haven't seen you all day.
And she's not.
Yeah, I think Miss Williams has muted her computer.
Oh.
No, she's just ignoring us. I see her.
Miss Williams, I haven't seen you all day. She's like, yeah, whatever.
She muted us.
Who are y'all talking about?
Mrs. Williams, but she's ignoring us.
Oh, Miss Williams.
She's ignoring us.
Got her mic off.
She's so cool. Now she's ignoring the whole school.
And Miss Nelson, she's doing a TV show, or she's like, here at home with Jametta. Jamita Live. Welcome to Jamita Live.
For the sake of time, because
I'm gonna take that for prophetic word. That's what I'm a TV show.
I think we all need to, mute.
if you all can mute yourselves, do we have a group by show of a hand who would want to share out? I think we'll have time for 2 groups. Tell us what the initial lesson plan was and give us a few sentences on how you differentiated with the new lesson, with the augmentation to the lesson, I should say. I think we can take 2 groups. Do we have a volunteer? No volunteers? Oh my God.
Senator Gary, you want to go, Senator?
Okay. Mr. Smith.
The first person always end up being the best because we get critiqued.
Okay.
So you can go ahead.
So Mr. Smith was in my I teach 6th grade and he's usually in the class. So I feel like I'm observed every time I'm there. So he enjoyed my lesson, but he suggested I should have a map because I was teaching about Colombian coffee. So, and I think it's a good idea. Like I usually put a map, but in this time I didn't, but I think I should keep doing that. So the kids, Mr. Smith mentioned something that I should, because I was talking about the Colombian coffee, but I should have shown a map how they could see the route from the Ethiopia to Colombia. So they could see the root of the coffee. So I think that's a great idea that I should do that next time I teach the kids about that. And the reason I choose to talk about.
Let me interrupt you for a second and ask a question. How is the map being used?
The map would be used to show, because they're seeing the visual, right, of the imagery of coffee in Colombia. So the map will be able to put things in perspective. It's a world map, so they can see the different continents and the different route that coffee traveled. So they can trace the map and know the countries, the destinations, and to know, because a lot of the kids struggle with where things are in the world and where does it apply to them. And so the map would just boost the lesson to teach the geography without them knowing that they're learning geography, in a sense where it's enhancing the understanding of this product came from Colombia. Colombia is in the south. We can trace the Colombia to United States,
okay,
or Ethiopia.
I see where you're going. Let me say this. That's a really good idea. That is scaffolding, and I want to differentiate only because that is using the materials and the tools to kind of make students more ready to get to the actual objective. But when we're thinking about differentiating, we're doing something different to the degree that it's going to change one of those byproducts that I mentioned earlier. So that's a really good use of materials to help. Was there anything else that you all changed? So if you were talking about Ms. Noguera, let's say that the objective was to talk about um,
The culture of Colombia and about coffee. The culture about Colombia, because I teach them a lot about culture of different countries. So I found this video about Colombian coffee, but what I really like about this was that they mentioned Ethiopia, and we have a big population of Ethiopian kids in our school. So I thought that they would find this video even more interesting. And they told me that they really enjoy hearing that they mention Ethiopia.
Let me ask you this. How did you assess their learning? For instance, we could say, that's a rhetorical question. You might say, tomorrow when you come in, or maybe even for homework, maybe the homework is the assessment. You all are going to complete a worksheet that says X, Y, and Z. But maybe when they come back that next day, the differentiation is the students are going to compare and contrast other commodities from Ethiopia. You see what I'm saying? So I just wanted to make that distinction. If we had more time, I wouldn't push through it so quickly, but I did feel the need to make that distinction. That scaffolding, though, to your point, Mr. Smith and Ms. Noguera, I think is super important. Like, it's helping groups of students like understand, okay, where are these two places in relation to one another? Okay, we have time for one more, and then I'm going to be quiet. Miss Sixth Grade Lucas.
Miss Barrett and myself. Can you hear? Okay. So Miss Barrett and myself and I teach math, and Miss Barrett teaches math also as part of.
I can't hear.
We cannot hear.
Who is your partner? Can your partner share?
Miss Barrett, Miss Barrett.
So we were talking, sorry. So Ms. Lucas and I were talking, we're both math teachers. Like, I teach second grade, she teaches middle school math. And, you know, we were talking about like how to do differentiation within like the lesson. And I've actually am kind of been thinking about like what my kids were talking, or what we're going to be talking about over the next couple of weeks, which is place value. I'm thinking, how can I talk about this, you know, with my students, you know, presenting place value. You know, I know that like, you know, I'll obviously pick a starting point and then see where, okay, maybe my student who's really, really struggling, maybe he needs to actually have like, you know, a physical place value mat and physical blocks and whatnot to work with so that he can learn it. Whereas my student who is the kind who's about going above and beyond, you know, right now, like I'm looking at our textbook, our place value that we're learning in the textbook goes to thousands place in this chapter. Well, maybe for him, I extend it past thousands place, you know, to millions, hundreds, whatnot, and see where he can go with that. And I was also talking a little bit about some of the language in the book, like how do I explain the vocabulary? You know, maybe I'll have some, you know, I'll obviously probably have some picture vocabulary for some of the students, and maybe talk with some of the other more proficient students, maybe have them write their own definitions for what they think expanded form means, or draw, you know, basically show me their understanding. And Ms. Lucas was talking about like how within her lessons, you know, the kids, you know, they always start with the same introductory activity. And then from there, like once they go into the main topic for the day, you know, that's where the differentiation comes, you know, for her students who are still need a little extra help, she's got the activity tailored one way for them. For the students who are right on target, she's got that activity targeted at that level. And then for the students who might be a little bit beyond, she's got her activity, you know, targeted towards that as well. And that, you know, at the end, you know, she does collect the assessments and whatnot. And she kind of goes from there with how she's going to plan for future lessons.
Awesome. Awesome. I was visiting a building and the teacher was using hand puppets to teach place value. And I was like,
that's a good idea.
That is, I bet it could work in middle school too. Like it was the most amazing things. It's like, hi, I'm the tens column. And
oh my God, you're giving me an idea for like how to do this virtually. So
like, yeah, just get a sock and Yeah.
Maybe, oh, that's a good idea. All
uh,
right.
I should be sharing my screen again, but that seems so mundane at this point. It's 3:04.
Mhm.
But I think next steps, Miss Lewis, I am going to send the PowerPoint, the protocol, and a link to the Sackler 7, which I think is absolutely amazing.
Yes.
But I hope to be able to come back, going to the conversation I was having with Caitlin about the equity audits. I think it's going to give you all an opportunity as a community to kind of deep dive into how your units of study in ELA and social studies, how where you're placing your values, because I think um, there's some opportunities there, but I would love to help you all explore those things. But be that as it may, I'm 5 minutes over my time, and I'm like right in the door of you and your 3-day weekend. So I'm gonna shut up and I'm gonna turn it over to Ms. Lewis.
Well, Desmond, we want to thank you so much. You always do an amazing job stretching our thinking, right, and helping us to look at our practice. So we appreciate you. We thank you that we're excited, like I said before, that you're a part of our community. So we can definitely tap on you again. We want to keep this going, and we're excited about the work, and it is work. And one thing I wanted to share with the staff is that it's okay to be vulnerable in this space, because a true educator has to stay humble. We have to stay able to learn, to glean from one another. You shouldn't, a educator is a lifelong learner, like it or not, right? And that does also mean that we have to shift the paradigms that we were raised with, right? And that's all of us, as Mr. Smith was saying, some of the paradigms that we all of us come with all of our lived experiences, right? Doesn't make it right, but those are our lived experiences, and we bring all of that into the classroom. If we're a doctor, we bring all that into the doctor's office. And so it's so important that we break down those components. And yes, race and culture, but also, as Ms. Moraes was saying, body image and all these other things also come to play, right? You see, so we constantly, as a Christian school, as a Catholic school, we have to be contemplative in those areas that sometimes are difficult. And so I appreciate this work. And in this season, we see that this work is essential to raising and building a citizenry that will be sustainable, right? To have a community that can coexist, right? So when we're seeing that more and more, and we all as educators are charged with that work. And that's why we call it a vocation and not a job. So again, I thank you. Next week, we will not see one another. Oh.
Savannah.
No, we won't. No, she'll be by herself, Mr. Williams, because the school.
I'm gonna leave her right there.
You know what? Don't leave that baby at the door. You're gonna end up like the people in the doctor's office on the.
Edwards, I have your address. She'll be there like at 8:15.
Okay, well you could drop the pretty girl out, but I don't mind. She'll say, "Why am I with the principal? Who is she?" But it's fine. I get it. She's adorable. I'd love to have some girl energy for the day. But needless to say, this week, we will be 3 days virtual. But when you're doing your lesson plans this weekend, think about differentiation. Look at your lesson plans. Share your lesson plans with a colleague, next week, and say, "Hey, what do you guys see here?" At least one. But I know that Desmond is going to talk about some of the post work for this, but I want you to really, this is a focus on our lesson plans. What are we planning? How are we planning? And why are we planning, right? So please take that with you as you're getting ready for the weekend, the long weekend. Hey, pretty handsome baby. And please take it into your work as we continue this process this year.
Thank you all. Like I said, I'll send the protocol as a Word document and the other materials. And you all have a blessed and safe weekend, get some rest, and I look forward to working with you all again. Like I can't thank you all enough.
We appreciate you, Desmond.
All right, take care, everyone.
Thank you.
You.
Have a good weekend, everyone.
Thank you. You too.